One of the bright baseball minds that I worked with at the mothership, he's Steve Phillips, host of Leadoff Spot on MLB Network and Sirius-XM, former Mets GM. He joins us on the program. Steve, full disclosure, I heard you on Mad Dog Radio this morning coming in, and I said, you know what? Steve is making some nice, concrete, bite-sized answers here, giving opinions on both sides of this. And I thought, you know what? Let me have him come on and summarize exactly what is going on with Major League Baseball right now. So thanks for joining us on short notice, and it's great to see you.
Good to see you too, and glad to be here. And obviously, these negotiations going on. Baseball made their proposal, and it was effectively a non-starter for the union. The idea of the sliding scale. And I think the way to look at it is owners have proclaimed that they're going to lose 40% of the revenues without fans in the stands. That includes ticket sales, concessions, parking, all of that, that it's 40%. The proposal they made to the players on taking a pay cut off of the prorated salary is a sliding scale that impacts guys differently depending upon how much money they make. But effectively, on average, they're asking the players to take a 33% pay cut. Now, so effectively, the 40% loss, they're actually putting 33% of that on the players and only holding 7% of that themselves from the owner's perspective. So it's a non-starter for the players. They don't like the sliding scale and the way it's sort of spread out. And so the union now looking to put together a counter proposal that we're hearing is going to be prorated salaries. That's it. And we want more games. And from the owner's perspective, they're looking at it saying we lose about $680,000 per game paying prorated salaries without fans in the stands. More games is worse for the owners, and it pushes the regular season deeper into the fall, where the owners have a real concern that they might lose the playoffs with the second wave of the virus. And the playoffs is the biggest line item of revenue for owners right now, that playoff share of the network money. They can't put that at risk. And so therein lies the problem in this negotiation.
All right, let me make you the mediator here. You're going to bring both sides together. What is the common ground that will allow us to be able to play baseball?
Right. So the first thing the players need to understand is the owner's perspective. There's two things. One, not having fans in the stands is a major issue when it comes to revenues that needs to be addressed. That a player getting 100% of his day's pay when the owner's getting 60% of revenue, that's the problem. The players need to acknowledge it, and they have to get off of the prorated salaries. The other thing the players need to understand is that if they're going to get paid, the owners are going to pay them up front and then make themselves whole by collecting the playoff money. If the playoffs don't happen, then it's catastrophic losses for the owners. So the players need to protect the owners with the risk of losing the playoffs. From the owner's perspective, they need to understand for the players that prorated salaries already cripples them at half their pay, and taking less than that with where they are and the fact they have short-term lifespan as a baseball player, that ultimately they're the ones going on the field taking the physical risk. That has dollar value that needs to be acknowledged. And so ultimately, the two sides need to understand prorated salaries at 100% will not get a deal done. The players are going to have to come off of that. And the owners are not going to get a 50-50 share of the losses with the players because they're taking physical risk, and the owners can make it up in the future by just making different business decisions next year. And they could have expansion a couple of years from now where they could have $1 billion franchise fee and make themselves whole in a significant way. So the middle ground is get off of the prorated salaries, but the owners are not going to get a 20% split of the 40% loss. It's going to be players take a 10% reduction in your prorated salary, but you're going to have to defer some of that money, and it will be paid contingent upon whether we have the playoffs or not. And if we get there, you get the full share of a 10% pay cut off your prorated salary. We make a deal and we move on.
I wonder about this, looking back on the NFL deal that the owners and players struck. And what I thought the Players Association did brilliantly was play to the guys that aren't making a lot of money. We're going to get you benefits here. Therefore, they were going to get the votes they needed to have this pass. You have the haves and the have-nots. And it feels like Mike Trout or Max Scherzer, those guys are taking the biggest financial haircut. Whereas it feels like the owners or the commissioners playing to the guys who are making minimum here, like these guys have to come back. Mike Trout or Max Scherzer, they don't have to come back. Is there going to be a war between the haves and the have-nots inside the Players Association.
Right. So you're 100% right. Now, I don't believe that that was the owner's purpose
Okay.
in their offer to split the union, but it could have been a residual impact of it. Now, it could backfire on them because 65% of the players make between the minimum salary and $1 million. Those players, under the owner's proposal, will play half the season, 50% of the season, and get 46% of their pay. They're not damaged that significantly. A guy like Mike Trout is going to play half the season and get 22% of his pay. And so that feels there's like an injustice there, but 65% of the players are pretty safe. I got to tell you, I think the players are more tightly united than what the owners gave them credit for. Now, I know you got a lot of guys out there talking, and they may not be as united from their leadership to contain themselves, but I don't think there's any player that's going to look at Mike Trout and say, yeah, your 36 million should turn into 7 million this year. And you should take the bulk of the payback to the owners and all of this. And so I think there's going to have to be that's why I think the players' response to the owner's proposal will be like, yeah, that's a nice offer. We don't care anything about that. Our counter proposal is not going to work off of your system, your format, your structure. We're going to come at you completely differently with our proposal.
Yeah, but I'm concerned about, we're talking to Steve Phillips, host of MLB Radio Network on Sirius-XM. I'm concerned about when you start to look at this with guys wanting to come back. This is a star-driven league. I mean, we do show up for Clayton Kershaw or, Aaron Judge or Mike Trout. If they're not coming back, the guys who make all this money, are people going to be that starved to say, hey, I'm okay with watching the Phillies without Bryce Harper here? Do they run the risk of that, Steve?
Yeah, I think they do. I think the risk exists. And yet, and the other, for other reasons, they still might make a deal and some players might not play. Mike Trout's wife's expecting a baby. And the notion of, does he put himself at risk and his wife and baby at risk? Garrett Cole's wife's expecting a baby. They're the two highest paid guys out there. So that does, I think players will play. And if they don't, I still think it's a compelling enough product that you're going to get players to show up and play and fans are going to watch because we're desperate. We're desperate to be able to watch some live sports here in the States.
Yeah, I just wonder how this goes horribly wrong. And baseball has to know its place in the sports society, the sports landscape here. And I think that it feels tenuous, Steve.
It does. And I think that this negotiation is not exclusive to the 2020 season. We've got a collective bargaining agreement that's due to expire at the end of 2021. That's just on the horizon. And there's a high level of distrust, which I thought we had made up a lot of ground with labor peace for a long period of time. But man, we went right back to the Hatfields and McCoys here. I mean, it has gotten ugly right out of the get-go. And the players don't trust the owners' numbers. When the owners say it's going to cost us 40%, the players are like, okay, let's show us the books. And the owners have never just shown the books. Now, the owners may be telling the truth that it's 40% of their revenues, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a 40% loss, because some part of that 40% might be coming out of some of the profits that they were making. And so it might turn in a 40% loss of revenue might be a 20% loss this year. And so the players, Max Scherzer came out and said, we're not coming off prorated numbers unless you show us the books. If you show us the books, we'll make it public and then we'll go along with it. And he thinks the reason the owners don't want to do it is that they're telling a different story. I got to tell you that, Dan, having been in the front office for 13 years, I never saw the second set of books if there's two sets of books. The way we set it up with the Mets was we set up to break even. We projected revenues, worked backwards off of that as to what payroll could be, minor league expenses, scouting expenses, and set up to break even. If we won and went to the playoffs, we made money. If we lost and we were losing money, we traded guys at the deadline, trying to get back to break even. There wasn't this secret set of books with the super sauce somewhere that they're hiding money. I never saw it if there were those set of books.
You, of course, were the GM with the Mets with the Bobby Bonilla deal. And I'm wondering, I think it allowed you guys to sign Mike Hampton. Is that fair to say? It freed up some money. But if you look back on that deal, would you make that deal again with Bobby Bonilla?
Yeah, so remember, we're releasing Bobby Bonilla, and ownership said, that his group, his agency, had represented Darryl Strawberry back in the day, where they had done deferred compensation. And Bonilla, people don't know this, when he first signed with the Mets the first time around, he had deferred compensation with them too. He still gets some payments from that first deal he made with the Mets, deferred compensation. And so, here's the thought on that, though, was the Mets looked at it at the time is we had Bernie Madoff as an investment vehicle. So the Mets looked at deferring Bonilla's compensation as a way for the team to make money, that they were going to take his, I think it was 6.8 million or whatever that number was, release him, and then invest that money with Madoff and put it out for 10 years, not paying Bonilla anything, and then spread it out over 25 years of payments, of equal payments. And so I would just tell, hey, give it to the accounting department, let them crunch numbers. And if Madoff returned this percentage or that percentage or that percentage, how much money would he make on Bonilla's money? And the notion was that we had a chance to make millions on his deal, even with the payout for Bonilla over that period of time. And so quite honestly, it was turning what was a loss of 6.8 million in a single year of releasing him into what would be a win and a financial windfall for the organization because of the Madoff investments.
Did you invest in Madoff?
You know what? It's funny. I actually, one time was suggested, say, you get some money saved up, we can maybe get you an account with Bernie. And I asked the question, what makes him better than everybody else? Like, why is he better? Like, why don't people just look at what he's doing and other people sort of copy his investments and do it? And what I was told was he keeps everything really close to the vest, obviously. But here's the thing, like Fred Wilpon, once Fred Wilpon vetted you, he loved you. And like I was in that group. Like I was one of his people that he really treated me with love and respect. And Bernie was a friend of his. That's why Fred had no idea, because when they had me go and have the accounting department run the money, they said, what if he loses some money some year? So they did a whole number of iterations on it and ran it through the system without any expectation of what the return would be, just knowing that he was better than others and they might get a return on it. So it was heartbreaking because for the Wilpons, knowing Fred, it was the relationship. Obviously, he lost a lot of money, but the relationship and that sort of commitment and connection he had was really devastating. It was heartbreaking for me to see all of that and go through that from the outside looking in at that point.
But the aftershocks of that relationship between the Wilpons and Bernie Madoff, is that why the Mets are up for sale or been up for sale?
I think that by the way, I never ended up investing with it at all. So I avoided it. But I think that, that certainly was part of where they had been. But, I don't know. I think sometimes what we see with ownership is the succession plan, right? When the owner gets a little bit older, how do you, the estate taxes on a franchise? We saw it back in the day, I guess, with the Robbie family down in Florida, and they're selling the team. And, how do you then pay those taxes on the ownership of it? And so I think that there's some part of maybe the planning for a succession plan that's coming into it. But, here's the thing, if expansion may be coming, and that may be a way for owners to solve their problem, right? Put billion-dollar expansion fees for 2 new franchises to come in to get you to 32, which would balance it out. Then they can sort of subsidize themselves like they did back in the 90s to pay off the collusion payment and settlement when they added, the Rockies and Marlins back in the day. So I think that you may see the Mets hold on a bit if expansion is just around the corner.
Where are we going to expand to?
Well, I think Montreal seems like a potential place. Portland is a possibility. I think San Antonio, I didn't know this. San Antonio, the 7th most populated city in the country, 1.5 million in the city. I think that Nashville is a place that people are talking about as a possibility. Charlotte, and the notion is, and there's been this thought that Tampa and Oakland need to be resolved first, right? You've got 2 stadium issues there. The Oakland A's can't even pay their rent right now, by the way. $1.2 million have not paid their rent for this season. But the thought all along has been you've got to resolve those 2 before you expand. But I think you could find 28 owners right now who would vote to expand before worrying about what to do with Tampa Bay and Oakland if it's going to generate the expansion fees that could come with it to try to make everybody whole after the suffering financially from this pandemic.
Great stuff, Steve. I hope you're doing well, and we appreciate you joining us.
Good, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Dan.
That's Steve Phillips, host of MLB Network Radio on Sirius-XM.